Hello, YouTube. So this is me live. Um, I just wanted to have a quick thought and put this to YouTube about the lockdown. So, not thinking about a particular lockdown. Um, you could perhaps think of it as my own ones here in Australia, in Melbourne. But, they're all pretty similar. And I wanted to talk about the effectiveness of it. So, right now, we have just over 800,000 deaths worldwide. 26, and I better get the proper figures. So I'll go on to world.org, and it tells me there's 26,841,309 cases. Of those, we've had 879,866 deaths, and 18,964,812 have recovered. Of course, those recoveries are not counting. There's some countries who aren't saying who's recovered. I think the UK, Netherlands, and there's a few others, like Sweden, have not actually mentioned who's recovered. So they've had people recover, and they just haven't mentioned it. So a ballpark figure, just under 900,000 deaths. Now, that's 900,000 too many. That's a terrible number. And I just wanted to talk about the lockdown. So a little bit of maths for everyone. So the world population is about 7.7 billion. So how many people would have caught the virus if we didn't have some controls? And the main control we've had is a lockdown. So we've had border control as well, but that hasn't been particularly effective because people have still come in, still had some effectiveness. But the main thing is that we've blocked off countries from each other. We've had restrictions, had people having to keep distances. We've had things like masks and different things like that. So, okay, so I wanted to go with some figures. So there was a figure, and this was a bit of a guess, about how many people are immune. So of course, the World Health Organization says nobody's immune. Now, anyone with a basic knowledge of science would know that's a lie. That's not true. The claim that nobody's immune is a lie, because for any virus, any disease, there are people who are immune. How many people are immune? We don't know. We won't know until probably 5 years later, 10 years later, maybe. And then we'll know. But there was a bit of a guess made. So one of the guesses that was made was based on the Diamond Princess. And of course, that had, again, I can probably get the exact number. So getting this off Worldometer's thing. So Diamond Princess, 712 cases. So they had, I think it was 3,500 people on the boat, and 712 of them ended up catching the virus. Now, I think this was originally 8 people, originally 1, and then that became 8, and then it was 26, and so forth. So it ended up being 712. So that's around about 20%, just over 20% of them caught it. So on that basis, there was a scientist, a Nobel Prize winner, who suggested that 80% of people were naturally. Now, obviously, it's not exactly 80. It's a bit of a guess. So if we suggest that perhaps instead of 80, it's 75%. Now, look, it might even be less than that, but let's say it's 75% of people who are immune. That means that 25% of people, if they're directly exposed, and I think it's reasonable to assume that people on Diamond Princess were directly exposed. So if you're directly exposed, you have a 1 in 4 chance of catching. So if somebody coughs on you, kisses you, breathes all over you, as an average, 1 in 4 people are going to get it. But you don't know if you're in the 25%. And this, again, it's a bit of an estimate. But if you're in the 25% who are a chance of catching it, or if you're in the 75% group that are no chance of catching it, you don't know. Now, of course, we also know, and they did have data released in January, but we're no longer supposed to be looking at that. But the data that was released said that different age groups are catching it more, and of course, it was sort of the very young were not catching it, and the very old were not catching it either. Um, and they had the different groupings, and of course, they had it in their 10-year groups, which is actually not cut-offs. If people understand immunology, our immune system changes with puberty, that's the big one, and also menopause. And there's also a pre-puberty thing, there's a midlife crisis, and there's a few other little things that happen in life that change our hormones and they change our immune systems. So, and they're not necessarily getting worse each time, they're just changing. So, I'm of course acutely aware of that because it affects how your allergies are. So, if you're someone with a lot of allergies, you might find some of them disappear at some of these time periods. You also might find new ones come along, or the ones that you have become worse. That's all a part of your immune system, and so you may be immune to something when you're 12, before you go through puberty, and then when you're 14, in the middle of going through puberty, you might not be immune to it anymore, and or you might have something that you're allergic to, and then you're not allergic to it anymore. And these things do change. So of course we know with any virus or any disease, if our immune system was working perfectly, then we would stop the virus from affecting us. We would just kill it before it even came in. And to understand it really simply, it's essentially if you think of your immune system like some guards, ideally, or bouncers, let's say, ideally they would know who all the people are who are under 18. So if you think of the virus as being people who are under 18 or under 21 if you're in a country where 21 is the age limit. So people that it's illegal for them to come in. Ideally, if your immune system, your guards are working perfectly, doesn't matter what the virus is, they will not be able to come in. Doesn't matter what the disease is, they won't be able to come in. But some of these viruses are sneaky. They get fake IDs. They dress up. They pretend. And of course, some of our immune systems are better than others, and we might be prone to certain things. So again, using that analogy, there might be that for some people, if you have a particularly attractive girl and she dresses in a certain way, you'll just let her in. And other people, that doesn't work. So there are some viruses that some people are more prone to than others. Um, for example, you might be somebody who is particularly prone to whooping cough or particularly prone to malaria. So that's how that works. So you can never say, oh, nobody's immune. I mean, there are people who are immune to AIDS. There are people who are immune to malaria. There are people who are immune to um, Ebola. And so there most certainly are people who are immune to COVID-19. And the claim that there isn't is just ridiculous. It's a false claim. So it's just a lie. And we know that the World Health Organization has lied about a lot of things. So that's one thing they've lied about. So how many people are immune? Well, that estimate was about 75%, or they said 80%. I'm going to say 75. So let's just assume it's 75%. So that's a conservative number. Look, even if it's 60%, it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this. It doesn't matter what proportion it is, only that we acknowledge that some people are immune, other people are not. And it varies age groups. So based on the data that we had originally, the prepubescent group, which is 0 to 8, roughly, and this depends person to person, that group are the most resistant. So newborn babies, who for other viruses are very vulnerable, for this are almost completely immune. So they're not going to catch it. They're very unlikely. Now, we have had cases around the world, even newborn babies that have caught it, but very, 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 very rare in proportion. And just because you've had 2 cases in the entire world who've caught it doesn't make them vulnerable. And I know there are some people who say, well, no, that's happened one time in the history of the world. We should be scared of our kids. No. You've got to use your math. So we're talking about a figure, and I saw one at one stage, it was 0.8%. That's the chance. So if the average is 20 or 25%, and there's a 0.8%, they're much more resistant. So that 0 to 8 age group is the most resistant. Very elderly people are also very resistant, so they're not catching it. So their immune system in a lot of cases is quite weak, but for whatever reason, they're quite resistant to this, to catching it. They're not resistant to dying, so don't confuse the two. They're not the same thing. So elderly are actually not catching it very much. And some people get confused about that. Now, they're still not as resistant as this newborn baby thing. And I think from the second group, which is 8 to 12 roughly, again, depends on the person. So you have your newborn child thing, then you have your prepubescent, and then you have your pubescent. So 8 to 12, that's the second group. They're also very resistant. So I think that was around 1.5% chance of catching it and virtually zero chance of dying. And I'm saying virtually, there may well have been one or two cases in the world, but you shouldn't worry about anyone under 13, really. It's just not, it's not really worth worrying too much about. The chances are just so slim of either catching it or especially dying of it. Now, I'm not saying they should just go out there and deliberately get infected. It's not that level. But I don't think they should be panicking or worrying. Now, the older group, which is over 65, are not catching it. They're the third most resistant. And then, of course, we go to the one before that, which is the post-menopause group. And then the rest of them are reasonably similar. So from about 13, you're suddenly catching it. So that's the puberty change, which is the biggest change that we have hormone-wise, immune system-wise, in our entire life. When we go through puberty, our immune system changes so dramatically. It's almost like we're a different person, immune system-wise. And what happens with this virus is that before your puberty, you're almost completely immune, very, very resistant, and you're very unlikely to die from it. But when you turn 13, or it's not when you turn 13, but when you go through puberty, and some people go through puberty when they're 8. So again, these ages are just rough guides. Some people don't go through it till they're 20. So, it depends on the person. So when you have that change, all of a sudden you're vulnerable to this virus, to catch it. So we have seen that they are the most likely to catch it, people in that range. And that range goes till about 30 or 35, is that puberty group. And then we go through the midlife crisis, which is a minor puberty change, a minor hormonal change, a minor immune system change, but it's still a change. And that happens around 30 to 35, some people 40. And, it varies a little bit to the person. I'd probably say 35 on average. So between 13 and 35, this is our pubescent age, our time when we're physically becoming adults. I don't know, people don't think of 13-year-olds as adults, but in terms of your physiology, in terms of your immune system, that's what you are. And in terms of this virus doesn't care about laws. It just says, well, you're at that stage. And so what happens at that age is that they're a very big chance of catching it. And I think it's very close to 50%. So it's about twice as likely as the average. So half the people who are exposed at that age are going to catch it. So, but the chance of them dying is really small. It's not as small as the even younger groups, so the 8 to 12 or the 0 to 8, but it's still very, very low. I think it's around 0.1% chance of dying. That's the mortality rate in that 13 to 35 age range. So you've got a 50% chance of catching it, or I think it's 48%, and a 0.1 chance of dying from it. So very high chance of catching it, very low chance of dying from it. And that's what a lot of people call the carrier group. Now, I talked a little bit about the elderly not catching it. So they were about a 12% chance of catching it. which is about half the average. And this is by elderly, I'm saying over 65 or over 70. It's sort of that old age thing. So I'm not talking about menopause. Menopause is about 55. But you go through another hormonal change even later past menopause. And this is the final one that you have, and that's about 65 or 70. And at that one, you become even more resistant. So it's about 12%. So it's about half as resistant. So it's not as resistant as a baby, nowhere near. But it's a lot more resistant than this group 13 to 35. So 13 to 35, we're talking about 48% chance of catching it, 0.1% chance of dying. Now, in your 65 plus, you're talking about 12% chance of catching it, so 1/4 the chance of catching it, but about a 28% chance of dying. So if you do catch it, 1 in 4 chance of dying. So it's pretty awful, and that's by far the worst chance of dying. So that age range, very high chance of dying. Now the overall mortality rate is 0.9%. Now that's with medical support. So that's with you getting all the best medicines and all the best attention that you get, 0.9%. So to have a group that's 28% chance of dying, again, these figures, it was based on early data. It may well be slightly different now. And of course, they're hiding the data now for that type of thing, so we don't know. But 28% is huge. So even if you combine 12% chance of catching it with 28% chance of dying from it, that's still much worse than that 13 to 35 range, which is 48% chance of catching it with 0.1% chance of dying. So, I mean, you combine them, 0.48%, that's very small. You combine the other one, and you're talking a much bigger number, about 2.8%. So if you combine chance of catching it and also chance of dying from it, it's about a 6 times worse chance for the elderly compared to the people who are 13 to 35, the puberty range. So, and again, those ages, it's a little bit fluid because different people are different people. And I'm talking about hormonal change, which changes your immune system. And that's what the real barrier is. So there will be some people that are biologically old at 60, 55, 50 even, and other people who don't get there till 75 or 80. So it does change a little bit. And so these are the things that we know. And so we're overall looking at a 0.9% chance. Now, we know that, and they've got these breakdowns. One of the breakdowns is that 5% of people who catch it get a serious version, or what they call critical. So I should say critical as opposed to serious. So critical means that you could die from it. So overall, and this is average, 5% chance. Now that's not age range because it gets really complicated if we do that. So we talk about these numbers. So if you catch it, so you've caught it, which varies depending on the age, and also the mortality rate varies depending on age. But I'm just saying on average, 88% of people who catch it get so little symptoms that they may not necessarily know that they have it. Not necessarily asymptomatic, but they may just go, "Oh, I've got a bit of a headache." Just brush it off. And that's particularly people in that, I'll say under 35. So any age from 0 to 35. So there's 3 different groups there, but anyone under 35 is unlikely to know that they've got it. So that's on top of the immune people. So the immune people as well, which could be of any age. If you're immune, you could be 95 and you could be immune. If you're one of the immune people when you're 95, you're immune. When you're immune, you're immune. It doesn't really matter that you're 95. You're just as immune when you're 95 as you are if you're 12. So if you're immune, if you're one of the 75% of people who are immune, you're immune. And that doesn't matter if you're 95, if you've got cancer, if you've got diabetes, you've got a heart condition. If you're immune, you're immune. So that's one thing that we need to recognise there. So it's an estimate that around about 75% of people are immune. So when we've got that situation there. So, and where was I there? I've lost my plot a little bit. But anyway, so yeah, so if you, what I was saying, anyway, my point was anyway that there's going to be a proportion of deaths, and that's right. So 5%, so 88% are asymptomatic or very more small symptoms, and around about 15% get a serious version of it. About 5% get a critical version. So if you're talking about, hang on, that can't be right. It's 88% are asymptomatic, 12% get some version of it, and 5%. So 12% get serious symptoms, 5% get critical symptoms. Yeah, that's right. 88, 12, 5. Yeah, I've forgotten the numbers. So yeah, 5% get a critical version. So 5%, and what we talk about with critical is you could die. So if you get a critical version of it, you could die. So if you have this critical thing, you're probably coughing, you're probably unable to breathe, etc., and you could die. If you don't have that, you can't die from it. So most people between that 13 to 35 age range, or that puberty age range, so before midlife crisis, after puberty, or during puberty, and yeah, so in that age range, what we might call the adult age range, some people will object to, obviously. I'm calling a 13-year-old an adult. I am in terms of their immune system. And so in that age range, you're very unlikely to become critical. In fact, under 35. So before 13 as well. So anyone under 35 are very unlikely to become critical at all. Now there will be some, but we're talking about less than 1%. Whereas it's about 5% overall on average. And yeah, so those ones they need medical attention. If you don't have a critical version or a serious version, you don't need medical attention. Just go home, try not to infect other people. And by try, I say, really, this is really important to the lives of other people, because you don't know if somebody you infect is going to be immune. First of all, if they're immune, well, good on them. That doesn't matter. But if they're not immune and they catch it, and then they happen to be, particularly if they're in that later age group of 28% mortality rate, well, you've killed somebody. You've got a 1 in 4 chance of killing them. And that's, even though for you and your friends it's no good. And look, even though most people in that under 35, most people are not going to die from that. A very tiny percentage of them is going to die. It doesn't mean you should just infect them, because half of them are going to catch it, and you don't know. Maybe they might be one of the unlucky ones. That you're unlikely to be immune in that age range, and yeah, not unlikely. You're only a 52% chance of being immune in that age range, and you are just going to, if you infect enough people, you're going to find those people that are going to die from it. So yeah, it's that situation. So 5%. So people have talked about it, the mortality rate, and World Health Organization said 3.4%. Well, other people said 0.9 now. To my knowledge, 0.9 is accurate. 3.4% is not accurate, but it might be accurate in terms of without medical attention. So when we talk about a 5% of people being critical, we're talking about they might die. Now, that doesn't mean they will die, but they might die without medical assistance. So it's not saying 5% will die. It could well be 3%, 4%. It might even be 2%. And we don't know the figures, because in most parts of the world, people are getting medical attention. And the only time when they're not, well, it's not being recorded. So we don't actually know the mortality rate without medical assistance. But we could perhaps guess around about 3%. So Without medical assistance, it's about 3%. So, going back to the lockdown thing, so we know currently, and I've said those figures, it's about 800,000 people have died and about 25 million who've caught it. Now, do you want to know how many people would have caught it if it just spread everywhere? I'm going to give you these figures. So 77.7 billion is the population of the world. Get a little calculator out. So pump it in. 7.7 billion. Now, let's say it's 20% who are vulnerable to it. So 20% of people who could catch it. So that works out to be 1.54 billion. So without lockdowns, without restrictions, 1.54 billion. With lockdowns, with restrictions, we have had. Again, I'll make sure I've got the right figures. 26 million, 1.54 billion. Now that's such a huge difference. That's 50 times, 55 times is the difference. Now, even if we say, all right, we're missing 90% of cases, still 5 times. Still a big difference. Now let's work out how many of them will die. So I'll do it twice. So first one I'll do with medical intervention, 0.9%, 13 million, 13.86 million. The actual death toll, 880,000. We're talking about 15 times. Now, that's with medical intervention. I'll go back to that one and times it by 3.4%. So this is without medical intervention. We're talking about 52 million deaths, 880,000. And I'm not saying 880,000 will be the final figure, because obviously that we're still getting a lot of new infections coming. But let's say we double it, or even we triple it. We're up to 2.5 million, 52 million. So with our lockdowns, if we assume that we're not even halfway, and perhaps that's the case, let's triple the death figures. We're up to 2.5 million. If we had not had lockdowns, we'd be at anywhere from 13 million to 52 million, depending on whether or not we had medical intervention. And again, that medical intervention thing, I know a lot of people were saying, well, what was this flattening the curve thing about? The flattening of the curve was about the difference between 13 million and 52 million as a worldwide thing. The difference between medical intervention and no medical intervention. Now, lockdowns have actually gone further than that, and they have actually prevented a lot. Now, it could well be, it might well be, we end up having those huge figures of 1/5 of the world getting it, which would be 1.5 billion. Now, we haven't had 1.5 billion, we've only had officially 26 million. Now, perhaps that's only 1/10 of the real cases, perhaps because we know we miss a lot. So even if we think that's 260 million or 26 million, it's probably not quite that many, because there are some countries that do test a lot and do catch most of them. I know here in Australia for a while we were estimating that we were catching about half of them. At the moment in Victoria, it's closer to that 10% level. I think 10% is sort of the worst that we have. So in other words, we miss 90% of them, and that represents severe lack of control. Unfortunately, the countries that are worst affected are the ones that are close to that. So certainly USA now, Italy at its peak, France and Spain at their peak were only catching about 1 in every 10 cases. And yeah, so the case numbers are not very accurate. The deaths are fairly accurate, although we have had some cases of people underreporting deaths. Look, I'm going to very briefly talk about this QAnon, which is I don't even want to call it a conspiracy theory. It's a lie. The QAnon says that because people have a comorbidity, and then they catch COVID-19, they have a comorbidity that makes them more likely to die, and therefore, when they put on the thing that they died of, on their death certificate, they died of COVID-19, that's therefore not accurate. That's according to QAnon. QAnon are lying when they're saying that. So I'll explain this very briefly. So let's say that you have cancer, and you might have 6 years to live. I mean, I had a family friend who had cancer, and she was given, I think it was 4 years to live. And of course, if she had caught COVID-19, unfortunately, she's passed away now. Anyway, had she caught COVID-19, according to those statistics, she would have been a very big chance of dying of it. And they would have put COVID-19 down as the cause of death. You would say, oh, well, she had cancer. So if you've got cancer and you have 3 or 4 years to live, I don't really want to give that example. Not feeling good. But anyway, if you have cancer and you have 3 or 4 years to live, and then you catch COVID-19 and you die in a week, or in 2 weeks, or in a month, COVID-19 killed you. The fact that you were going to die 3 or 4 years later, anyway, doesn't mean that killed you. It means that COVID-19 killed you. It's a bit like, let's say if you've got AIDS, and when you have AIDS, your immune system is destroyed. There's very little left, depending on how far it's progressed. So you don't die from AIDS. You die from, what people die from, a cold, common cold. Common colds don't usually kill people, but if you have AIDS, they do kill you. So there might be common cold floating around, you'll catch it and you'll die because you have AIDS. They don't put the common cold on as the cause of death in that situation. They put that you died of AIDS because that common cold wouldn't have killed you if you didn't have AIDS. And in the same respect, if you have cancer, but you contract COVID-19, you catch it, I suppose that's a fair way of describing it. COVID-19 is what kills you, not the cancer. Because it'd be different if you were about to die, you're breathing your last breath, you're on your deathbed, and you catch COVID-19 and you die 5 minutes later. Well, then perhaps we could say that COVID-19 didn't really kill you. But that's not what's happening. So these people, the ones that are in the over 70 age group or over 65, the old age group, the ones that are 28% chance of dying, and they often have other comorbidities, but it depends on the person. So when they're a 28% chance of dying from COVID-19, are they a 28% chance of dying in a week if they didn't catch it? No. So their life expectancy, let's say you're 65, you're a normal 65-year-old person, your life expectancy is probably about 82. That's 17 years to go on average. And yet, with this, there's a 28% chance that you'll die within 2 weeks. You can work out that 17 years and 2 weeks is not the same number. So this is a QAnon lie. Now, I don't want to say cancer, you might have 4 years to live. Heart disease, you might have 20 years to live. Diabetes, you might have 40 years to live. You're saying because these things make COVID-19 more likely to kill you, doesn't mean that these things killed you. COVID-19 has killed you. So I don't even, because look, I have some respect for conspiracy theories that are trying to find out the truth, that are, even the ones that I've proven are really ridiculous, such as with this one, the idea that it was created in a lab and was used to control the world. Look, I can respect that. People have tried their best. But this QAnon one is a lie. It's not. it doesn't deserve the respect of a conspiracy theory. Now, I've gone on about conspiracy theories in other places, but conspiracy theories fit into one of three categories. The first category are people genuinely trying to find out the truth. And I think that we should respect those ones, people that are genuinely trying their best um, to find out the truth. And look, if they get it wrong, that's fair enough. I think that it's quite an intelligent thing to do to try to find out the truth. And if we get it wrong, that's okay. The second category are the ones that are actually created or at least manipulated by our intelligence agencies. These ones are false. We shouldn't believe them. Unfortunately, they're the ones that we tend to believe. Unfortunately, we've just been trained to believe these ones. That's the unfortunate thing. And the third category are the ones that are true. So the ones that are true are actually a bigger proportion than we think, but they're just very rarely talked about. So if it's a true conspiracy theory, it'll be hidden. The government won't let it see the light of day. So if you see it making the rounds, it's probably not that category. If you find it and it's hidden away and nobody's heard of it, look, there's a chance. I'm not saying that definitely means that it's a real conspiracy, that it's a real story. But if it's something that you had to find that nobody's heard of before, that makes perfect sense. That's what that is. Look, while I'm on the topic, with this COVID-19 situation, I have no doubt of its origins. It came from bats. It came from people eating bats, and they, from what I know, they were live bats. I mean, look, there is a little bit of doubt that it might have been from someone just breathing in a flu that mutated, because it was a bat flu, quite a normal, common bat flu from a fruit bat, I believe, that was local to Wuhan. And look, it could be they breathed in. It could have, and I heard this theory that it could have been from pangolins or snakes as an intermediary. I mean, there's no doubt biologically that it was a bat flu, but it could have been gone through that intermediary, and it could have been breathed in. Look, I think most likely it was eaten, and it came directly from the bat. And there was talk of bat soup. And look, I think that the evidence suggests that they were eating bat soup, which is a dish served live, by the way, and that somehow perhaps it wasn't prepared properly, and they were sneezed on the people that ate it. And we have a date of when they did this, and so that date was around the 15th of December last year, 2019, and we know who did it. She's of course denied it, but look, the numbers for when we know how quickly this reproduces, so it doubles every 3 days. Those numbers stack up with the 15th of December. So I know there's some claims that it began in November, October, September. I don't think that's true. I think for it to have started any earlier, there would have had to have been some controls, and we would have noticed controls. And so we haven't noticed controls. Now, one of the controls could have been that they just killed everybody that had it. But I don't think that's happened. I think that's very unlikely to have happened. And so I think that it's just it's an ordinary bit of bad luck that it's come from a natural source. We had, I mean, viruses mutate all the time. Now, why do we call this a coronavirus? And this is something that a lot of people have been confused about. So coronavirus, as most people know, it's not a commonly used term, but it refers to every type of influenza and the common cold. So there's over 8,000 types of influenza, and they fit into four main categories, which we just call A, B, C, and D. Category A are the common ones. And so, generally speaking, category A influenzas don't bother us that much. They annoy us, and we might be sick for a little while, but they don't generally kill people. Category B are a little bit worse. Category C are worse again. and category D are the worst of them all. Now, they're also, that's the level of how common they are. So category D are the least common, category A are the most common. And it also is how good our vaccines are against them. So when you take a flu shot, for the most part, you're getting a flu shot to vaccine against A and B type of influenzas. So you're not generally protected against C types, and there's very little protection against D. And so of the 8,000 different types of influenza, you're probably only protected against about 5,000 or 6,000. So there's still quite a lot, and new ones come out every year. There's as many as 10 or 15 new ones every single year that are not covered by the vaccine, and this is why people still get sick. So they're mutations or they're new ones. Now, some of these come from animals. You may remember swine flu and, of course, bird flu. There's other things, and we have had flus caused by bats before as well. And the reason that they come from these is because these animals have similar immune systems to us, which is quite bizarre. But it's just the viruses attach and they sneak in. So these viruses can't affect all animals. So you get different viruses for each animal because the immune systems are different. Now, of course, they will switch between species by changing a little bit. It's what we call a mutation. And they can only really switch from a similar or an animal with a similar immune system. So this one we know is 96% identical to bat flu. So it had a 4% change. Now, previously, we would have called this a flu. We would have called this a bat flu. But the decision was made by the World Health Organization around 2013 that when we're dealing with animal influenzas, we should call them coronaviruses, at least when they're infecting humans. Now, that's not to say that they're not flus, because they most certainly are. It's just to say that they're unusual. And by calling them coronaviruses, it should twig in our memory that these are more dangerous, at least when they first come out. Obviously, once we get used to them, once we have vaccines, they'll be no worse than than your normal types of flus. Normal, I put normal. Flus kill lots of people. They're terrible things. But certainly, we would expect that after 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years, if this virus is still going around, it will really not be a major thing. So in a lot of ways, we don't need to find a vaccine because our own immune systems will adapt to be able to fight this better. So again, about 80% of people are having immune systems that are just killing it before it comes into their system. And unfortunately, about 20% of people, so I should have said 75%. So 75% of people, round about, we'll say 75 to 80%, around about that sort of figure, have immune systems where the virus comes in and says, "Oh, I'm a good person. Seriously, you can let me in, no worries." And they go, "Nah," and our immune system kills it before it even comes in. So, for most people, that's what's happening. Their fake IDs are not working, but for some people, they're coming in. Now, that's not a slight on anybody that your immune system didn't notice it. I mean, everybody, immune systems make mistakes; they miss them. But that's just the reality. But unfortunately, when we are dealing with a new type of virus, it's particularly hard for our immune system to catch up. So some people will still go, for their immune system, which you don't consciously communicate with, obviously. We can communicate with our arms and say, "Hey, move my arms." You can't really say to your immune system, "Hey, stop that virus." I mean, it's just not how our brains work. It's not how we control things. We're too complex a life form for that to work. So this virus, of course, pretends to be a normal cell, comes in, we swallow it, and then eventually we notice it. But by the time we notice it, of course, our immune system's going, "Oh, shit," and it kills all the extra things, and that's why it does so much damage. So it's quite insidious, this particular one. But that's not to say that in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, even without a vaccine. And we obviously do have vaccines. I could talk about that as well. 161, I believe. And I'll see if I can remember the figures. It was 28 are in human trials. I think it might be 32 now. I think 8 were at the final stage of human trials. And look, there's no guarantee that all 8 of them will progress and be good. But let's say 5 or 6 of them are going to be good. We are going to have vaccines. And once we have the vaccines, of course, it will be just a type of influenza. And it'll be included in the flu vaccine. I don't think we will need to have a separate vaccine for this once it becomes common. So we'll have a separate vaccine now, but in 2 or 3 years, when you take the flu shot, this will be part of the flu shot. And of course, different countries for political reasons produce different vaccines. That's it. So yeah, so the lockdowns definitely are working, and but are they a good idea? It's a different question entirely, because they do cause a lot of damage, mental health, physical health, and financial problems, and that's rather a bit complicated. Anyway, that's it from me. So bye bye.